At 30,000 feet above ground, a single sentence changed everything. "Miss, you need to move to the back." The flight attendant's tone was firm. The white woman behind him smirked as if justice had been served. But justice had not been served. It had just been insulted. Zara Johnson sat frozen in her first-class seat, clutching a boarding pass paid for with 2 decades of sacrifice and brilliance. The airline? Horizon Airways? The CEO? Zara Johnson herself. But the flight attendant didn't know that. He only saw a young black woman, someone he assumed didn't belong, and as he yanked away her carry-on bag, her most precious belonging fell and shattered on the cabin floor. A framed photo of her grandmother, the woman whose inheritance had started it all. This wasn't just about a seat. This was about the buried systems that still dictate who belongs and who must silently comply. What happened next would expose a conspiracy at the highest levels of Zara's company and unleash a storm that would shake the airline industry to its core. Before we continue this shocking story of power, prejudice, and reckoning, comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Zara Johnson sank into an economy seat near the back of the aircraft. Her presence met with sideways glances and uncertain stares. The pristine blazer she wore, a subtle navy wool tailored in Milan, suddenly felt out of place among the cramped rows. She sat there not because she lacked the right ticket, not because she couldn't afford luxury, but because someone had decided she didn't look the part. Her eyes remained fixed on the cracked photo of her grandmother, now balanced in her lap. It had been framed lovingly years ago, a snapshot of the woman who raised her, who told her, "You are not what they call you. You are what you build." That inheritance, the meager $10,000 Zara had received when her grandmother passed, had seeded Horizon Airways, a billion-dollar enterprise born from faith, resilience, and countless sleepless nights in engineering labs. But now the child her grandmother raised to believe in excellence sat in row 32, stripped of dignity by a man who hadn't even asked for her name. The flight rocked lightly with turbulence, but Zara remained steady. Her mind traveled backwards, not to a safe place, but to the furnace that had forged her. She had been doubted at every stage. The admissions panel at Tech University who tried to steer her toward community college, the early investors who laughed at her business plan, the skeptical engineers who didn't want to report to a young black woman, and the regulators who delayed her launch over concerns they never quite explained. She had learned to keep her face still and her voice calm, even when the ground was breaking underneath her. Bradley Wilson, the flight attendant who had publicly removed her from her rightful seat, walked past again. He barely spared her a glance now. Zara studied him this time. Tall, mid-40s, sharp cheekbones, the haircut of someone who paid too much for superficial appearances. She knew his type, a company man, confident in hierarchy, loyal to power, but blind to integrity. He smiled broadly at a white passenger 2 rows ahead, bringing them champagne. "Only the best for our elite," he said with pride. Zara bit down hard on the inside of her cheek. At that moment, she realized something more painful than the humiliation she had endured. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't an isolated error or a rogue employee. No, this was systemic, designed, cultivated by negligence at best or cruelty at worst. She needed to know which. The woman who had taken her seat, Elaine Whitfield, leaned back in plush comfort, sipping her complimentary drink with a grace born from inherited entitlement. Zara had tried to explain. She had shown her boarding pass. But when she did, Bradley had narrowed his eyes and said, "There must be some mistake." Other staff gathered, watching the drama unfold. Not one had asked her if she was all right. Not one had questioned if Bradley had gone too far. Instead, they had threatened to remove her for causing a scene. Security had come, a pat-down in front of a full plane, her bag dumped open, lotion, receipts, even a sanitary pad rolling onto the floor. But what broke her, truly broke her, was the clatter of the photo frame as it hit the ground. Her grandmother's image, splintered into fractured glass and injustice. Only one person had looked at her differently during the ordeal. Thomas Reynolds, head of Horizon's flight security. Zara had caught his eye, gave him a small shake of her head. Not now. Not yet. And Thomas had understood. Zara had built Horizon Airlines in secretive defiance of the very structures that judged her. She often flew incognito, her name hidden behind basic aliases, to see how her company really treated passengers when no one was watching. She wanted real data, not sanitized reports. But today's data had cut too deep. The humiliation wasn't theoretical. It was deeply personal. Back in her seat, she tapped open her tablet, scrolling past unread emails. There was an urgent one from her COO, Marcus Chen. "We need to talk. Something's happening with operations. Richard's moving fast. Complaint resolutions have dropped by 40% while you've been away. Looks intentional." Zara inhaled sharply. Richard Harrington, Vice President of Operations. 58. Old school. Old world. She had retained him for his connections in the legacy aviation industry, a calculated move to keep investors at ease. But she had never fully trusted him. His philosophies had always reeked of exclusion, masked as tradition. Another email came through, this one from the airline's automated system, notifying her of a customer complaint resolution adjustment policy. No formal announcement, no oversight, just lines of code altering how feedback from minority passengers was categorized and deprioritized. Suddenly, her seat downgrade made perfect sense. Bradley wasn't a one-off. He was a symptom, a product, a reflection of something rotting at the core. Zara closed the tablet, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from fury laced with restraint. She had no time to scream, no use for rage. She needed evidence, precision, truth. Because the next step wouldn't be an emotional outburst, it would be a war. The descent into Los Angeles was smooth, but inside Zara Johnson's mind, a storm had begun to gather. She stepped off the plane with no applause, no apology, no recognition. Just the cold indifference of the airline she built, from its first paper sketch on a napkin to the global titan it had become. And now that same empire was rotting from within. As she walked through LAX's bustling terminal, she turned her phone horizontal and opened a secure app, Halo Sight. It was an internal tool she had custom built with her tech division, a cross between live analytics and whistleblower backchannel. Most executives didn't even know it existed. Horizon staff at every level could anonymously flag misconduct, push data, or even record infractions without fear of retaliation. She filtered the incoming alerts by date, region, and keyword. Racial profiling, downgraded boarding, staff escalation, female solo traveler, ID mismatch. The results made her stop in her tracks. 27 incidents, just in the past month. 12 had been downgraded in the logs as guest misunderstanding. 5 were labeled passenger non-compliance. Not one had triggered executive review. She closed the app, breath short. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a coordinated purge of Horizon's founding principles. A driver held up a sign near the baggage carousel. "Ms. J. She nodded and followed him to a discreet black sedan. Not a word was exchanged. Inside, she pulled out a single earpiece, slid it into her right ear, and said quietly, "Activate Protocol 9. "Confirming identity," said the AI assistant. Zara held her thumb to the scanner hidden beneath her briefcase lock. A small beep. Verified. "Welcome back, founder. Initiating Protocol 9, Internal Ethics Recon. Would you like silent flagging, active disruption, or blackout mode?" "Silent flagging," she replied, "and prepare active disruption if I authorize at level red." "Confirmed." Zara leaned back. The driver adjusted the rearview mirror, but her eyes were already closed. She wasn't resting. She was calculating. When she'd founded Horizon, it wasn't just to fly planes. It was to shift culture, to build a company where human dignity was core infrastructure, not corporate lip service. Every employee had to go through bias training, empathy immersion, and a course titled Passenger Sovereignty. It had been revolutionary and expensive. Wall Street didn't love it, but the results had been clear. Horizon's customer loyalty was 37% higher than industry standard. But now someone had found a back door. Someone had deliberately begun dismantling that vision. By the time the car rolled to a halt in front of the Horizon West Coast executive hangar, Zara had already sent 5 encrypted directives. Freeze internal promotions in the operations department, flag all unscheduled policy updates within the past 90 days, pull financial incentives paid to frontline supervisors, and generate an AI reconstruction of her own ejection from the plane via onboard CCTV. Thomas Reynolds was already waiting at the private gate, a broad-shouldered black man with salt and pepper hair and the quiet intensity of a military strategist. He didn't say, "Welcome." He said, "I reviewed the footage. I saw the look on your face. You want it clean or you want it scorched?" "Neither," she said. "Not yet. I want it surgical." They stepped into her command suite, an operations office above the hangar floor, lined with digital panels and floor-to-ceiling glass. The moment she walked in, the biometric scanner reactivated all security feeds. Zara moved to the central display where her assistant, Aiden, a quiet genius in his 20s, was already queuing a video feed. It was Bradley, in the galley, laughing with crew. The transcript read, "She tried to tell me she was a CEO. Can you believe that?" "Of what, hair products?" another crew member joked. "Nah, probably some fake startup. These people always think they're someone." The audio crackled into silence. Zara stood still. Then she turned to Aiden. "Send this to the Ethics Command Center, mark it Tier 1, and notify HR that the individuals in that video are under review pending full investigation." Thomas stepped closer. "Richard's already in LA. He landed 2 hours ago, scheduled for a board strategy dinner tonight." Zara smiled faintly. "Perfect. Let's make it his last one." Thomas raised a brow. "You going public?" "Not yet, but I will go visible." She pulled out her phone and texted one sentence to the Horizon Board's private channel. "CEO Johnson has resumed direct oversight of passenger equity operations." Within 60 seconds, 3 of the 9 board members responded, "Welcome back. About time, and need to talk. Richard's been slippery." Zara stared out at the rows of aircraft, her fleet, and felt something return. Not rage, not revenge. Power, focused, controlled, and sharpened by truth. She didn't need to announce what happened on that plane. She just needed to show what would happen next. Inside Horizon Airlines' downtown LA headquarters, the gleaming glass walls and automated concierge bots masked the quiet rot beneath. Richard Langston, the acting COO, strode confidently through the executive floor, trailed by 2 junior aides. His Armani suit was spotless, his voice sharp as ever, and his agenda for the evening was simple: schmooze board members, secure his interim position permanently, and bury Zara Johnson's legacy once and for all. He hadn't yet seen the message that sent tremors through the Horizon leadership chain. CEO Johnson has resumed direct oversight of passenger equity operations. The boardroom buzzed with quiet side glances and quick phone checks. Richard poured himself a scotch and muttered to his assistant, "Get comms on the line. We may have a PR flare-up brewing." She's bluffing. But deep within Horizon's encrypted core, Zara had already taken steps he couldn't reverse. She activated what she once jokingly called the skeleton sweep. It was a top-secret audit protocol designed for whistleblower crises, but in her hands it became a weapon of truth. It searched not only policies and logs, but human behavior. The results were damning. Richard's name appeared over 62 times in flagged communications. Emails where he referred to retraining PR optics to appeal to the core customer demographic. Meetings where he ordered staff to tighten boarding protocols for non-priority profiles, quietly. Voice memos hinting that founder ideals were incompatible with current market trends. And worse, a hidden memo draft, never sent, never signed, lay in a private server folder titled Project Clean Slate. Zara opened it with shaking hands. Horizon's original DEI strategy, while noble, has become a liability. CEO Johnson's absence has allowed us to retune the company for efficiency, and her return may destabilize that progress. Recommends soft marginalizing her public authority until board review. It was a coup, polite, bloodless, legal, and surgically cruel. Zara didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just stared at her reflection in the dark monitor screen. She'd fought too long to build a culture rooted in dignity and equity. and now that foundation had been methodically carved out beneath her feet. Her voice was calm when she called Thomas. "Release the HR suppression logs. I want every report that was buried under resolved without action in the past 18 months. He replied instantly. "Already compiling. It's bad, Zara. There's patterns, targeted downgrades, guest exclusions, even compensation denials, quietly refused." "How many?" "Over 400 cases." Aiden chimed in over the intercom. "And I found something else. Passenger review scores have been manipulated. It looks like mid-level managers have been deleting high-scoring feedback for non-premium customers of color. Algorithm bias reinforcement. Subtle, but real." Zara's jaw tightened. This wasn't just corporate erosion. It was engineered exclusion. She issued 5 commands in sequence. Pause all external marketing and issue a vague internal recalibration notice. Suspend performance bonuses for all upper-level management pending review. Unseal all ethics complaints filed under conflict resolution. Trigger a real-time alert to all employees. An executive audit of company conduct has begun. You may speak freely. Schedule an emergency all-hands broadcast. Live, no teleprompter, unedited, within 12 hours. At the same time, Richard received his first hint of real trouble. The CFO's assistant approached, eyes wide. "Sir, we've had 14 internal resignation notices this hour, and I just got word. Johnson activated the equity division's recon system. That's never been touched." Richard snapped, "Pull her access. Now." "I can't. She's running it from the founder core node. It's air-gapped. Military-grade encryption." Richard's face darkened. "Then schedule a board lockdown meeting tonight. We vote her out before sunrise." But he didn't know that 3 board members had already flipped. One of them, Evelyn Park, the quiet but fiercely ethical lead of Horizon's Sustainability Council, had just texted Zara directly. "If you want to go public, I'll stand with you. We owe you that." Zara stared at the message for a moment. Then she replied, "Not yet, but be ready. When I hit broadcast, I'm not just reclaiming a company. I'm exposing a system." Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had humiliated her, Bradley, was already being quietly summoned for questioning. 2 of his colleagues had folded under internal pressure and submitted written apologies. But it was too late for damage control. The rot had reached the surface, and the media, if tipped off, would feast on the carcass. Zara sat down at her desk, opened a clean digital slate, and began drafting the one thing she knew would shift everything. A manifesto, not for revenge, but for the soul of an industry. It would begin with one line. This company was founded on the belief that every person deserves to fly with dignity. And it would end with a reckoning. The morning of the broadcast arrived cloaked in tension. From Horizon Airlines hangars in Dallas to its tech ops center in Manila, employees opened their terminals to a pulsing alert. Live CEO address at 9 a.m. PST, mandatory viewing. All operations paused during broadcast. Some rolled their eyes, expecting another corporate rebranding pitch or sustainability PR stunt, but others sensed something deeper. Rumors had already begun to swirl. Zara Johnson's back. They say she was kicked off her own plane, and that she's about to drop receipts. In the control tower of LAX, Jamal Hayes, a 25-year veteran flight coordinator, leaned back in his swivel chair. "I was here when she walked in the first time, 10 years ago, told us she wanted to make this airline the soul of the sky. You think she's finally going to burn the place down?" His younger colleague grinned. "Or rebuild it." Meanwhile, Zara stood in a dimly lit studio carved out from the original founder's suite. No makeup, no stage crew, just a single wide-angle lens and a neutral background behind her. Thomas was off camera, watching the system diagnostics. "Stream is secure. No board interference. You've got 9 minutes. Say everything." She nodded. As the countdown ticked to 0, millions of Horizon employees, contractors, and even curious press members tuned in. The screen faded from black, and there she was. Not triumphant, not angry, just human. She began, "This isn't a marketing campaign. This isn't an apology. This is the truth, and it may cost me everything." Her voice trembled slightly, then steadied. 12 days ago, I was escorted off a flight by security. Not because I posed a threat, but because I didn't look like I belonged. No uniform, no entourage. Just a mother, a husband, and our teenage daughter, treated like trespassers on our own airline. This is not the story of a CEO being disrespected. This is about something far worse. How Horizon Airlines, the company I founded, has drifted from its purpose. How we've created two skies, one for the visible elite and one for the invisible rest. She tapped a control and a series of internal slides appeared behind her. Real screenshots of emails, boarding log algorithms, and complaint suppression flows. Over 400 guest experience reports were quietly buried. Dozens of employees flagged these concerns. Most were ignored, some were punished. A culture of quiet exclusion was cultivated in the name of operational efficiency. And I let it happen. She took a breath. Yes, I stepped away. I believed the values would hold. But culture isn't self-sustaining. It has to be defended, loudly, constantly. And when I was gone, the silence grew. Across the globe, staff stared at their screens, frozen. In a break room in Chicago, a Latina gate agent wiped tears from her eyes. I filed one of those reports 3 times, got reassigned every time I did. In a remote call center in Ghana, a customer support team lead whispered, "She knows. She really knows." Zara's voice broke gently as she said, "This morning I asked myself, do I walk away from what we built or do I fight for it? And the answer is simple. We fight." She then outlined a radical reform plan, publicly in real time. Immediate reinstatement of suspended whistleblowers. Independent civil rights audit across all U.S. and international operations. Creation of a real-time reporting tool, public-facing, transparent, and anonymous. Permanent board seat reserved for a rotating employee-elected ethics chair. 1. Full rollback of all priority boarding algorithms tied to consumer profiling. And then she added the line that would echo across newsrooms and TikTok clips for the next 72 hours. If I can be dragged off my own plane, then no one is safe. And that ends now. The feed cut. For several seconds, the world went silent. Then the reaction exploded. Hashtags like Mashi, Zara Speaks, Sky Justice, and Boardroom Revolt trended globally. Reporters scrambled to reach Horizon's board for comment, but most refused to speak. Employees flooded internal channels with messages of solidarity. Bradley, the flight attendant who triggered the incident, was placed on leave within the hour. But something even more significant occurred. Hundreds of past passengers began coming forward. Stories poured in. A single black mother denied check-in despite valid documents. A Sikh man flagged repeatedly for random security checks, only on Horizon flights. An autistic teen with a service dog forced to board last to avoid disruption. They now had a voice, and that voice had a name. Zara Johnson. At 10:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, a group of Horizon engineers sent a signed open letter. "We have long suspected data bias in our optimization models. We now formally request full oversight from the CEO's Equity Task Force, and we offer our full technical cooperation." It was the awakening she had hoped for, but she knew it was only the beginning. Somewhere on the 42nd floor, Richard Langston stared at a frozen TV screen in his corner office. For the first time in years, his hands trembled. "She just declared war," he muttered. And he was right. But Zara hadn't declared war on him. She had declared war on everything he stood for. 3 hours after the broadcast, the landscape at Horizon Airlines was no longer the same. Zara Johnson had not only thrown a gauntlet at the feet of the corporate elite, she had cracked open the company's hidden vaults. Now people weren't just talking, they were digging. And what they uncovered was more than damning. It was systemic. In a small cubicle in Atlanta's scheduling division, a mid-level analyst named Arjun Patel stared at the data set he had been ordered to purge 6 months earlier. It had bothered him then, but fear held him back. Now, with Zara's open call for truth, something shifted inside him. He downloaded the suppressed report onto a flash drive, then opened an encrypted email channel set up by the new interim ethics team Zara had deployed. At the top of the email, he wrote, "Subject, suppressed algorithmic bias model, proof attached." The document revealed a buried protocol called client tier synchronization. On the surface, it looked like a way to streamline boarding, but the deeper logic exposed a more sinister design, flagging passengers based on profile match history, using zip codes, ethnic identifiers, and travel frequency. In essence, the system could downgrade or delay travelers who didn't fit a preferred customer archetype. Zara, reviewing this new flood of leaks from a makeshift command center in the Dallas headquarters, felt her stomach tighten. This was worse than she thought. Meanwhile, Thomas sat beside her, sorting through a tsunami of whistleblower emails, each carrying a similar theme: racial profiling, passenger silencing, retribution against staff who dared to question the system. "Zara," he said, handing her one file, "you need to read this one now." It was a report submitted by an ex-IT contractor named Dina Morales. She had been tasked in 2023 with a quiet firmware update for all Horizon kiosk systems. The update was marketed as a UX improvement, but the internal memo revealed something else: automatic triggers based on passport origin and skin tone detection via camera calibration. Her email concluded, "I resigned in protest, but I've kept copies. If this ever comes to light, I'm ready to testify. Just say the word." Zara closed her eyes. What had started as a personal humiliation was unraveling into a digital caste system built into the very core of the airline's infrastructure. She opened a secure channel and video called Dina. When the woman answered, her face was tense. "Are you really going to fight this?" Zara replied simply, "I already am." That same night, an anonymous internal group calling themselves the Skykeepers launched a coordinated data dump onto a decentralized blockchain archive. Within minutes, over 300 Horizon documents, memos, emails, code notes, were public and immutable. The press exploded. Major outlets picked up the story and ran headlines like, "CEO uncovers airline's digital discrimination engine," The New York Times; "Hidden code, real consequences," The Horizon Files, Wired magazine. They knew. They all knew. The Guardian. But inside the Horizon boardroom, panic took a different shape. Richard Langston slammed his fist on the marble conference table. How the hell did she get access to those archives? Elaine Chu, CFO and one of his oldest allies, replied coldly, "You built a house of glass, Richard, and now you're upset it's shattered." He turned to the lead legal counsel. "What's our exposure?" The lawyer hesitated. "With this much documentary evidence, and the fact she's reinstalled herself as active CEO, if regulators or civil rights groups move in, we're looking at federal investigations, potential RICO implications if they find any pattern of collusion." Langston's voice dropped into a growl. "Then we bury her, her family, her marriage, whatever we need to do." But someone in the room had already hit record. Across town, Zara walked quietly into her daughter Ava's bedroom. The teenager was sitting on the floor, headphones in, sketching airline cabin redesigns in her notebook. Zara sat beside her and whispered, "You okay?" Ava nodded, then removed her headphones. "They made me feel invisible, Mom. But today, you made everyone see me again." Zara kissed her forehead. "You gave me the strength to do it." Back at headquarters, the floodgates had opened. An ex-pilot named Carlos Redding stepped forward in a live interview, detailing how he was repeatedly passed over for international routes due to what HR called image alignment with premium clients. A former hospitality director confessed that the preferred client red carpet program had unspoken rules. Lighter-skinned passengers with Western surnames were quietly prioritized for upgrades. And then came the file that would blow the case wide open. Labeled simply, "Langston Model Version 3 Final Docs." Inside, it wasn't code or algorithms. It was a presentation pitch, created by Richard Langston himself, outlining a proposal to build a luxury preference index that ranked passengers by perceived brand alignment. One slide read, "Diversify appearance, not access. Public diversity matters. Private privilege must remain curated." Another slide chillingly said, "Let them feel welcomed. Don't let them own the space." It wasn't just evidence, it was ideology. That night, Zara sent the file to every major regulatory agency, and she made one final decision. Tomorrow she would hold a public press conference, not just to call out the system, but to name names, expose every actor complicit in the oppression, and call for a total civil aviation equity reform initiative. Thomas looked at her across the table and asked, "You sure? Once you go public like this, there's no going back." Zara replied, not with fear, but with absolute clarity. "Then we move forward, and we don't stop until the skies are safe for everyone." The next morning, the media didn't need an invitation. They were already there. By 9 a.m., the plaza outside Horizon Airlines' Dallas headquarters had transformed into a spectacle of lights, cameras, and an electric anticipation. Helicopters hovered overhead. Protesters gathered near the entry gates holding signs that read, "Flying while black is not a crime. If you don't see us, we'll make you." "Thank you, Zara." Inside, Zara stood in front of the mirror in her office, her navy blue suit crisp, her demeanor composed but not hardened. She wasn't here to retaliate. She was here to confront. And confrontation didn't have to be loud. It just had to be irreversible. Thomas entered with a stack of papers. "Last chance to soften the statement." Zara took them without looking. "We don't soften abuse. We name it." By 10 a.m., the world was watching. Live streams across YouTube, CNN, MSNBC, and even BBC had activated their feeds. Zara stepped onto the podium. Behind her, a massive digital screen displayed the words, "Equity in flight, a new era begins." She began. "My name is Zara Johnson. I am the CEO of Horizon Airlines. And for too long, this company, our company, has operated under a dual system. One visible to the public, one invisible, but deeply entrenched. Today, we make the invisible visible." The crowd hushed as she continued, her voice unwavering. "Last week, my family was removed from a Horizon flight, not because of a mistake, but because of a system designed to exclude. That system is real, and today I'm proving it." With a gesture, the digital screen behind her shifted. Slide after slide appeared. Emails, algorithm breakdowns, whistleblower testimony. Each document more damning than the last. Zara narrated them in real time. She highlighted the client tier synchronization code. She showed visual diagrams from Dina Morales' firmware notes. She cited page numbers and time-stamped employee memos. And then came the file, Langston's personal pitch. She paused, looked directly into the camera, and read, "Diversify appearance, not access. Public diversity matters. Private privilege must remain curated." A collective gasp echoed across the plaza. Zara lowered the file. This was not an oversight. This was a philosophy, one that ranks people based on appearance, background, and perceived market value. And I will not lead a company that profits from that belief. Inside a private Manhattan office, Richard Langston watched the feed with clenched fists. He turned to his crisis PR agent. "Shut her down." But it was too late. The public had seen it all. Every hidden memo, every policy dressed in corporate jargon but dripping with elitism. In real time, journalists began live tweeting quotes. Civil rights groups issued joint statements of support. And then Congresswoman Angela Ruiz posted, "I will be calling for a federal aviation discrimination inquiry this afternoon. Thank you, Zara Johnson, for your bravery." Back at the plaza, Zara wasn't done. Effective immediately, Horizon Airlines will dismantle every discriminatory protocol coded into our operations. We are introducing a new board diversity oversight panel composed of civil rights leaders, aviation experts, and community advocates. We're retraining every employee, and we're rewriting the algorithms that govern who flies, where, and how. She let that hang. But we cannot change the sky unless we first admit what clouds it. At that moment, the digital screen cut to black. Then it lit up with a new logo. Horizon, where all passengers soar. It wasn't a slogan, it was a declaration. As applause erupted from the crowd, Zara stepped down from the stage, but she wasn't alone. She walked directly into the media pit. "Ms. Johnson," one reporter shouted, "aren't you afraid this will destroy your company?" She turned to him. "I'm not here to protect a company. I'm here to protect people. If the company survives, it will be because it earns the right to." "Will you fire Richard Langston?" another asked. "I won't have to," she said. He already did it to himself. An aide handed her a phone. It was the U.S. Department of Transportation. Zara picked up. Yes, I'm ready to testify. Back in the boardroom, Langston's allies were already peeling away. Elaine Chu submitted her resignation with a scathing letter. You weaponized silence. Zara weaponized truth. One of you won. Within an hour, Langston was escorted from the building under board directive. His access revoked, his name stricken from internal records. A single statement followed. Horizon Airlines has terminated Richard Langston effective immediately. An internal ethics review is now underway. But Zara wasn't done. By the afternoon, she announced a sweeping compensation initiative for passengers who had been downgraded or denied service due to discriminatory policies, starting with a $200 million reparations fund drawn directly from executive bonuses. Thomas looked at her as the announcement went viral. You just rewrote the rule book for corporate accountability. She smiled, not for glory, but for justice. Good, because the old one was written in invisible ink. Later that night, she stood outside the airport where it all began. Her husband Jason by her side, her daughter Ava leaning against her shoulder. A new flight number flashed across the digital board. ZJ001. A plane named in her honor, renamed not for vanity, but legacy. Not for who she was, but for what she changed. The corporate walls Richard Langston once fortified with silence and polished cruelty began to crack, not with a bang, but with 1,000 voices rising in unison. Within 48 hours of Zara Johnson's historic press conference, over 600 former Horizon Airlines employees, flight attendants, engineers, contractors, and even pilots flooded whistleblower portals with their testimonies. Stories emerged of unspoken quotas, shadow seating policies, and back-end system tags like priority adjusted that flagged certain passengers of color as risk anomalies without any explanation. Some of these voices came from unlikely places. A former data scientist named Kian Patel published a Medium article titled, I helped code it. I'm sorry. In it, he admitted that while building the airline's customer prioritization algorithm, he was told to weigh perceived income level based on zip codes and accent detection. It was legal, but it was never right, Kian wrote. The article went viral in less than 2 hours. Kian's apology became the first brick in a crumbling wall. Horizon's stock price plummeted 22% in 3 days. By the end of the week, 3 other airlines, previously lauded for their inclusive branding, had quietly begun internal audits. The scandal wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Zara hadn't just exposed Horizon Airlines, she had cracked the fuselage of an entire industry. Meanwhile, inside Congress, the Aviation Equity Task Force was officially formed. Zara was summoned to Washington, D.C. to testify. The Senate chamber was packed when she arrived. Camera crews lined the back. Protesters and supporters alike gathered outside, chanting her name. As she walked in wearing a plain charcoal gray dress suit, there was no arrogance in her steps, only intention. Senator Malcolm Reyes, a staunch civil rights advocate, began the session. Ms. Johnson, you are under oath. Please state your name. Zara Lynn Johnson, she said clearly. Occupation. Chief Executive Officer, Horizon Airlines. He nodded. Ms. Johnson, did your company, under previous leadership, discriminate against black and brown passengers through coded internal systems? Yes. Did you inherit these systems knowingly? Number. But once I discovered them, I acted. What did you risk to expose them? Zara paused. Everything. But I couldn't lead from the top while ignoring the rot at the core. That single sentence became a headline around the world. Throughout the hearing, she detailed the internal policies, the corporate evasions, and the tiered worth model perpetuated across elite travel platforms. At one point, she held up a printed ticket, a duplicate of the boarding pass her daughter Ava had carried the day they were removed. This, she said, was coded S Delta Gray. That's how they tagged us. Not as passengers, not even as people, just data, marked for demotion. The silence in the room was deafening. After her testimony, Senator Reyes called for bipartisan legislation. The Passenger Equality Act, which would mandate transparency in airline booking algorithms, establish third-party audits, and criminalize racial profiling under the guise of operational discretion. By the following week, over 300 airports worldwide had pledged to review their partner airline practices. But while the policy world roiled, the collapse within Horizon continued to accelerate. Executives resigned in droves. Some tried to save face. Others fled before their names reached the media. A top HR executive, revealed to have signed off on appearance-based hiring filters, was sued by former applicants and removed from her position without severance. An internal investigation also revealed that the VP of Marketing, Elaine Chu's replacement, had attempted to suppress data that favored non-white customer satisfaction ratings to avoid brand realignment pressure. She too was dismissed. In a final blow, leaked footage from a 2022 private leadership summit surfaced. In it, Richard Langston was caught joking, "I don't care what color fills the seats as long as the front row stays white." That quote ignited a firestorm. Civil rights attorneys launched class action lawsuits. Boycotts expanded globally. But amidst the chaos, Zara stayed anchored. While departments unraveled and media outlets churned headlines, she hosted daily listening hours where current and former employees, especially those who had been silenced, were invited to speak anonymously or openly. Their accounts were heartbreaking. A black pilot grounded for disciplinary review after questioning the promotion of less experienced white colleagues. A transgender employee forced to use customer uniform B instead of their preferred gender expression. Zara didn't take notes. She took action. She ordered a full restructuring of Horizon's HR and diversity divisions, elevating them to C-suite status with direct access to the board. She opened a hotline, not run by corporate, but by independent advocacy groups. She brought in third-party educators to redesign training programs from scratch. Led by former victims of discrimination, not detached consultants. Internally, some board members pushed back, warning of brand erosion. But Zara had learned something about erosion. When a structure was built on inequity, erosion wasn't a threat. It was a cure. The cultural collapse wasn't the end. It was a clearing. By month's end, 38 discriminatory policies were abolished. Every single executive who had signed off on Langston's programs was either removed or under investigation. Horizon's brand was no longer sanitized by PR. It was being redefined by principle. And the passengers? They noticed. Passenger numbers after a brief dip began to rise. Not because of a marketing blitz, but because, for the first time in years, people believed they could board without shame. Zara stood in her office one night, watching a live feed of Horizon's JFK terminal. A black grandmother and her grandson smiled as they walked through Gate 8. A Sikh man in a bright orange turban checked into first class without hesitation. A Latina pilot saluted a ground crew of mixed-race technicians. She turned to Thomas. "We didn't just collapse a system," she said. "We're rebuilding a sky where everyone belongs." Zara Johnson stood in front of Horizon Airlines' new headquarters, a transparent glass building located not in some exclusive corporate district, but in downtown Atlanta, where communities of color had long been excluded from aviation leadership. This wasn't just a move, it was a declaration. Visibility, access, and accountability were no longer optional. They were core. The transformation was already underway. Within 3 months of the scandal, Horizon Airlines had launched the Elevate Initiative, a comprehensive program focused on dismantling the unspoken hierarchies embedded in corporate aviation. The initiative had 3 pillars: equity in employment, transparency in technology, and dignity in travel. It wasn't PR. It was a blueprint for survival. The first act of rebirth came with hiring. Rather than relying on prestige universities or referral-only networks, Horizon changed its recruitment model entirely. Job openings were distributed through community colleges, historically black colleges and universities, tribal and immigrant-focused organizations, and even youth shelters. They created pathways for women of color, formerly incarcerated individuals, and underrepresented tech professionals to join leadership tracks. By the end of the fiscal year, Horizon's managerial board was no longer majority white or male. It was, by statistical fact, the most diverse leadership team in the history of the airline industry. But representation wasn't enough. Zara knew the algorithms had been as complicit as the humans, so she tackled the tech. Horizon's entire passenger database system was rebuilt from the ground up under the supervision of an independent ethics council, composed of data scientists, civil rights lawyers, and community leaders. Any AI model used for seating, scheduling, or pricing was subjected to algorithmic accountability audits, with quarterly reports made public. Hidden scoring was banned. Passenger profiling abolished. A new notification was added to every boarding pass. This flight was booked using equity-tested systems. If you experience bias, report it directly. For the first time, technology wasn't a black box. It was a transparent lens. Meanwhile, within airports, changes bloomed where once there had been apathy. Customer service reps received empathy-based training from real passengers who had faced discrimination. Lounge access was no longer determined solely by arbitrary elite status, but included social equity memberships granted to teachers, veterans, caregivers, and others who traditionally flew economy out of necessity, not lack of merit. Security processes were altered too. Zara partnered with the Department of Transportation to pilot a bias-free boarding protocol at 5 major airports. TSA officers would now undergo biometric debiasing programs and be held to a revised code of conduct emphasizing racial neutrality, cultural sensitivity, and consent-based pat-down procedures. It was met with resistance by unions, but it stuck. People began to notice. Passengers of color reported, in record numbers, a first-time feeling of dignity while traveling. Horizon's customer satisfaction score doubled in 6 months. But more importantly, it was the written comments that told the true story. I boarded with my natural hair for the first time and didn't feel stared at. My Arabic name wasn't mispronounced or mocked. I was seen, just seen. The company also took symbolic steps because symbols matter. Zara renamed the airline's Premier Lounge program from Elite Cloud to Open Skies Collective. And the former executive suite, once named after Richard Langston, it became the Ava Room, dedicated to youth empowerment in travel. Inside was a rotating exhibit of letters written by young people from marginalized communities, sharing how they imagined a fairer world. Ava herself, now 15, cut the ribbon on its opening day. Her words echoed far beyond the glass doors. They thought my seat didn't matter. But I wasn't just fighting for a seat on a plane. I was fighting for space in the world. In partnership with universities and grassroots organizations, Horizon also funded Flight Forward, a scholarship program for aspiring Black and brown aviators. The goal wasn't just to increase diversity in flight crews. It was to rewrite the pipeline from cockpit to boardroom. For Zara, it was personal. She didn't want her daughter or anyone else's to grow up believing that power meant losing part of yourself to earn a place. At a corporate retreat, she told her team, "This company tried to strip us of worth, but now we give it back, freely, without measure." The business world watched with a mix of awe and cynicism. How could a company that had been at the center of racial scandal now lead an industry? The answer: courage without compromise. Zara turned down offers from lobbyists to slow the change. She rejected brand deals that wanted to co-opt the movement without investing in it. And when a prominent investment firm threatened to withdraw funding over her activist governance, she countered by opening Horizon's books to public audit and dared them to find one unethical cent. They didn't. They backed down. The tide was shifting. Other airlines began adopting Horizon's protocols. Airports introduced their own equity review boards. Even hotel and car rental partners were held to new standards before being allowed into Horizon's booking portal. What started as a scandal had become an engine of reform. By year's end, Zara was nominated for Time magazine's Person of the Year. Not for rescuing a brand, but for creating a movement. In her acceptance speech at a global equity conference, she said, "They pulled us off that plane thinking we'd disappear. But we didn't vanish. We rose, and we built an airspace where everyone breathes free." And that's when the audience rose to its feet. This wasn't just Horizon's story anymore. It was ours. It was a brisk winter morning when Zara Johnson boarded a Horizon flight to Washington, D.C., this time as a keynote speaker, not a humiliated passenger. She was 16 now, no longer a little girl in tears on a plane, but a symbol of what happens when one person dares to turn injustice into innovation. As she stepped onto the tarmac, a camera crew documented her journey, not as a spectacle, but as inspiration. Her mother, Zara Johnson, walked beside her, not as the silent, disrespected executive from that fateful day, but as the woman who revolutionized an entire industry. What had begun as humiliation had become a blueprint for justice, and the world had taken notice. Zara's transformation of Horizon Airlines was now taught at business schools from Wharton to Howard, not as a lesson in PR crisis management, but as a case study in moral capitalism, radical transparency, and empathetic power. Her methods were adopted across industries: healthcare systems that used her algorithmic equity audits, tech companies that modeled her inclusive hiring funnel. Even school boards began implementing dignity-first policies for student services. She had lit a match in the dark, and entire systems caught fire. But the legacy wasn't about Zara. It was about the shift she had ignited. The CEO, who once sat in silence during her daughter's humiliation, now spoke before parliaments and boards about structural bias, not as a threat, but as a solvable challenge. She didn't just rebuild an airline. She reimagined an economy built on respect. Yet what made the moral impact endure wasn't the high-level reforms. It was the chain reaction that began in everyday people. In airports across America, gate agents spoke differently to travelers with accents. Pilots made eye contact with kids sitting alone in row 26. Flight attendants stopped defaulting to stereotypes when assigning seats, and passengers started speaking up when something felt wrong. This wasn't accidental. Horizon launched a campaign called See Me, Fly With Me. It invited passengers to record stories of moments when they felt seen or invisible. Thousands of videos poured in. The airline turned them into a living archive. One day, a clip from a young Latina mother holding her baby went viral. She simply said, "This was the first time I didn't feel like I had to apologize for being here." That was the heart of the legacy. Zara's leadership reminded the world that power without empathy is tyranny, but power wielded with humility becomes transformation. To solidify the airline's values for generations to come, Horizon established the Zara Johnson Foundation for Ethical Leadership. Its mission: to ensure no child, no traveler, and no professional is ever shamed out of their rightful seat in society again. Scholarships, legislation, training platforms, all named not after founders or financiers, but after the child who cried not from weakness, but from the strength of knowing she didn't deserve what happened to her. The Foundation's annual summit brought together CEOs, students, artists, and survivors of discrimination. At the inaugural event, Ava herself took the stage and told a crowd of 2,000, "You all know what happened to me, but what you may not know is this. I wasn't just fighting for a seat on a plane. I was fighting for a world where every seat belongs to someone who earned it with dignity." Thunderous applause followed, but beyond the applause, a quieter truth began to take root. Discrimination wasn't a symptom of bad people. It was the result of unchecked systems. And now, thanks to one act of public humiliation gone viral, those systems were being rewritten. In the final chapter of Zara's journey with Horizon, she announced her departure, not in shame or scandal, but in victory. She would pass the torch to a new generation of leaders trained under her Justice by Design mentorship model. Before leaving, she issued a final company-wide memo.